Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul. Hopefully you're having an amazing day. The PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X are finally entering the swing of things, but of course, all eyes will soon be on the next generation. And according to Microsoft, they predict the release date for the next generation of consoles. We're going to start the video by discussing all of that and then move on to AMD. Specifically, some really good news for PC gamers, as a couple of key AMD Radeon GPUs have now crashed in price even more, and are actually looking to be excellent buys if you're thinking of going with Team Red. So let's start things out with Microsoft, shall we? Right after this message from the video's sponsor. If you're running a copy of Windows 10 which isn't activated, of course, not only do you have to worry about the missing customization options, but there's also that annoying Windows desktop watermark reminding you to activate. Today's video is sponsored by WhoKeys.com, and they have an excellent price on Windows 10 Professional as well as Home keys. Yeah, and they also of course sell games. I've bought a few Windows 10 keys with my own personal account to test everything was legit and worked in preparation for this sponsored video. You can pick up one of their keys for 25% off using the coupon code RGT in the checkout. There's links to their website in the video description. Also, if you're building a few systems, there's bundles available too. Again, you can check out WhoKeys.com and use the coupon code RGT for 25% off the listed Windows 10 key prices. So pretty much everyone and their dog at this point, and their cat and just about any other pets living with them, knows of course about Microsoft and Activision Blizzard and the FTC trial along with other various regulators in the industry. Now obviously this deal is worth a lot of cash, essentially 70 billion US dollars, and one of the good things about this trial actually is that there's a lot of dirty laundry that's being aired. And it's quite fascinating because even if you don't really have too much skin in the game, whether the acquisition goes through or not, you do start to have a much better understanding of what's going on in terms of the business practices with both Sony and Microsoft. Now, back last year, there was actually some evidence from Sony that essentially stated that, well, the PlayStation 6 as well as the next generation Microsoft console, whatever the heck that is not going to come out until at least 2027. So again, that was late last year, but IGN have managed to find something quite interesting. So court documents have been reviewed by IGN, and Microsoft believes that the quote expected starting period of the next generation consoles will be 2028. So I think we're now left with a pretty good window. Basically 2027 to 2028 is when the next generation is going to enter the swing of things. So that essentially means that, let's say, the PS5 is going to be replaced, or at least have its successor launch about 8 years after the initial console. Now my prediction is that I think, let's say, November 2028 is perhaps a little late. I wouldn't be surprised if it's late 2027. That is not a leak, by the way. I honestly do not know yet. And it's going to be absolutely fascinating to see what the focuses are of this next generation hardware. So every generation, of course, ups the ante one way or the other. I'm not going to go through the entire history of console hardware because I'll be here for quite a while. But for example, when we moved from the 16-bit to the 32-bit era, 3D became a big thing, right? Sure, there were some excellent 2D games that were being released, especially from, let's say, Capcom, like, for example, X-Men Children of the Atom, X-Men vs. Street Fighter Alpha, and many others besides. But a lot of titles, for example, the obligatory to mention Tomb Raider, well, let's just be honest, 3D really started to kick off then. And then with this latest generation of consoles, we've really seen the SSD become actually very important. It's not just about reducing the speed of loading times, but a lot of other stuff as well, just basically getting data into the system. And Microsoft and Sony have really been leveraging it, I think, quite extensively, and it's going to be very interesting to see what happens going forward. But moving on to the next generation, there's a lot of very interesting potential possibilities. I think ray tracing is going to definitely continue to be doubled down upon, and I would not be surprised, depending on what's going on with, let's say, AMD hardware, if path tracing becomes more prevalent. Both Sony as well as Microsoft have a lot of insight into the next generation hardware from AMD, for example, and I'm assuming they will stick with AMD for, let's say, the PS6. I honestly do not know. They could go with Nvidia. They could go with another company entirely. Let's face it, these talks do happen all of the time, not least of which, so they've got leverage in negotiations with their partners. But let's assume AMD is used. it's going to be, you know, multiple generations of AMD GPU in advance. We're basically on RDNA 3 at the moment with desktop. RDNA 4 is being released later next year. So you're probably going to be on like maybe RDNA 6 or 7, assuming we're still on the RDNA architecture. They may entirely go with something entirely different at that point, who the hell knows. So it's going to be very interesting to see again what the focus is, and whether we see a pro console from Sony and Microsoft. Microsoft have essentially said that there is no more powerful version of the Xbox planned, so the Xbox Series X is the be-all and end-all. Sony, of course, there are a lot of rumors, including from myself, that they are working on a PS5 Pro. What I would say is, if Microsoft were not to have already some plans internally, it would be a lot of work for them to start, because APUs take a long time to bring up. You know, this is pretty well known in the industry. You know, it's not just a case of, oh, we are slapping something together. A lot of the stuff is highly customized. They need to work with vendors like AMD to customize the hardware. So it would take them a long time to bring things up, at least a couple of years. It is possible, and I say this with some level of ignorance, that Microsoft did have some plans for a more powerful version of an Xbox. I've already leaked about Sabin, which was basically an Xbox Series S with steroids. It essentially had more RAM, more CPU performance, had a much better GPU with a machine learning block, but that's cancelled. It was a very cool project. It's possible that Microsoft did have some very early plans for a more powerful Xbox, and then they canned them, and that's why Spencer said that there are no plans now for a more powerful Xbox Series console. But honestly, I'm skeptical. I think that Microsoft are basically done for this generation. I think they're just going to continue to cost reduce, let's say, the Xbox Series. I'll be very curious to see what happens with the PS5 Pro, but I think the next generation is going to be very exciting. I am super stoked, to be honest, to see what happens if Sony does release the PS5 Pro, because I think it would be very cool, especially when we see games like Final Fantasy 16 hit like 720p in combat. Obviously, you know, you can optimize, but it's going to just be a very curious thing. Just moving on to PC hardware real quick. Couple of things. Videocards.com have managed to snag some 3D Mark benchmarks for the upcoming RTX 4060, which launches end of this month. I'm not going to go too much into the scores here. You can see the results yourself in a nice kind of comparison. Bottom line is, guys, the 4060 bottom line is, guys, on average the 4060 is just over 20% faster than the 3060, so that's not too bad. Honestly, it's not a terrible leap in performance. Well, I say leap in a very loose way, of course. The reality is, though, that this is, you know, it's reasonable, but it's certainly not super impressive either. I'm hoping the next generation, that would be RTX 50, does a lot better. But actually, I just want to mention real quick a couple of things for AMD. So first of all, Micro Center are actually doing a really good deal with the 7900 XT. Now, this seems to be US and in-store pickup only, according to videocards.com. They've actually had a reader that's tipped them about this. But basically speaking, this means that you can get this card for $200 cheaper than what it actually launched at. There are some deals actually, however, even on Amazon. So you're actually getting some deals for almost like low $700 actually from some retailers. So I'd highly encourage you guys to check around. Now, in my personal opinion, the 7900 at this price is really good. It's got a crap ton of RAM. It's got 20 gigs of RAM. And it's going to be really fast. Like, this thing is going to tear through most games easily at 4K. And the 7600 has now also dropped in price as well. So we're looking at a significant drop in price now for that. We're looking at the cheapest one being $250 US. Now, this is just a quick update because I put out another video just a few days ago where I was going into much more detail, much more exhaustive detail about a number of retailers in the US, Germany, and so on and so on. And basically, prices now are really starting to drop across the board with various cards. The fact is, of course, that people, they're just not so keen on buying at the moment, right? And I think used cards are also doing really well. You know, you've got a lot of options on things like eBay. CPUs are also dropping really quite significantly, especially if you're going something slightly older like an AM4 based CPU. You can get some really nice drop-in solutions, and obviously one of the benefits of AM4 is that if you have an older board, let's say like a 400 series board, you could very easily just do a BIOS update, and then, you know, bang, you can just throw in like a 5800 X3D or something like that, and you've got a really good gaming system. So yeah, just as a quick reminder though, not all boards will be okay with you updating the BIOS without like the correct CPU in. So I know most of you know this stuff, but yeah, it's very easy to do an oopsie. Just double check that your board can support, you know, updating without the relevant CPU or the right generation of CPU in, or just make it a lot easier on yourself before you take out the old CPU, do the BIOS update. That's just my personal opinion. It also has another benefit of doing that, and that's why I do that, even if you can update without you know, RAM or anything else attached to the system, and that is that if it posts with the correct CPU, with the old CPU in, and everything's fine, you could just rule out, you know, other issues. You're just like, okay, well, I know it's the new CPU which is causing the issue on the new BIOS, so that's kind of handy. Anyway, I think that's just about it for this particular video. It is really hot here in the UK. It is super duper toasty. So that's, yeah, just hopefully everyone's okay in the heat. I know in the US, obviously, you guys have, you know, you're not cavemen, you actually have air conditioning, but in the UK, the humidity at the moment is just absolutely brutal. So, yeah, just hopefully everyone's staying safe and hydrated. With that said, take care, guys. Bye for now.